Poke, 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 poke. Is this thing on? I'm not sure. We'll find out. Hi, I'm here with Nathan Stoner, whom you probably may have seen last week, or was it about 1 week? I can't remember these things. Anyway, when we talked about how God is logic, and that was a fun conversation. There'll be a link in the description, or you can just go back on the channel one. Nathan, welcome. Tell us who you are and what it is you think and why.
So, as previously discussed in last time, I'm a Penn State major, third year, well, going into my fourth year in finance, and basically just derived a lot of my beliefs in Christianity from taking the time to think about what makes sense and then how that can, and then I push that against, wise counsel in Christian communities that I am a part of. So, and then from that, I develop, an understanding that I'm trying to share in through this medium of giving a discussion and really working through different things. I don't have all the answers. I don't know everything that I believe to be true, and I just take this as a fun time to look at I bounce my ideas off of Christians. This is an opportunity to have somebody to bounce my ideas off of from a different perspective, and someone who might take a more neutral stance. And then for today's, we decided last time to break apart the structure of really where I've found, the strongest argument in defense of faith. And today was going to be set aside for the fine-tuning argument, which is the idea that the relative chance to our existence is so minute that there has to be like a deity behind it.
Or dice ready.
Dice ready, awesome. There has the chances are so small that we are at this point that there's either significance behind the events or some overarching sense of meaning behind it that is beyond what we can understand.
Okay, so the fine-tuning essentially is extraordinarily improbable.
Yes.
And that extraordinariness requires, or at least strongly indicates, a non-random or a causal, intentional thing to set them into that position.
Yes.
Whatever the knobs are, they had to be set very precisely.
Yes.
Okay. And that indicates for you intelligence.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. And I would say in this case, intelligence of superhuman variety.
Yes.
Yeah.
Super universal, actually, not just superhuman, because like I would say super universal. It has to be exterior to what
Infinity
we
is greater than, I'm not saying how far in, because I really wouldn't know how superhuman one would have to be in order to determine what the exact proper best ones are. If you that might be more obvious when you tell us exactly what those knobs are and how little they can move.
Yeah, so for clarification, I think it would be that it's just that if you were to have power over the knobs, you would have to be outside the universe. So then I think that there would be characterizations that can vary that still align with what I think has to be the case. But you can say, oh, well, because like, just for instance, just to put aside, we are talking about like a God figure.
I have no trouble at all grabbing this whole thing without even addressing the supernatural, because all you're describing is simulation theory, and I have no reason to reject simulation theory.
Yes. So yeah, it's simulation theory, and the idea behind it is not it. It's basically, I think I touched on this last time too. For anyone who was there last time, that not every argument that I will pose today is going to be in immediate effect to, Christianity is the true way.
This is your presentation. Run it.
Yeah.
Right.
And so,
This
like,
isn't a debate. This
this
is not
may
an
be
argument.
it's the argument that it can't just be random is
Yeah.
really the idea I'm trying to drive home, and
Mhm.
that can mean, "Oh, there's somebody just as fallible as we are in a fourth dimensional universe, and we're their science fair project." Like, create a time, like, because they would be outside of our time, so to us, our entire existence as a universe
Sure.
is finite and,
Yep.
like, workable within their whatever, if it even is a universe. And so then we could just be their project to like see how long can you sustain a intelligent, you know, I like conscious people, and like we're that people, and that everything else is just for like, yeah, basically. Before I go on too long, but like, yeah,
Yeah,
that's
I'm very familiar. I've written about a 3 or 4 page, a treatment of what that would look like that's
oh cool.
and funny. Go ahead.
So yeah, I mean that's basically it for introduction.
Okay.
Um, Surrounding that idea is just I think it's important to preface that so
Yes.
that I'm not gotten wrong or somebody's like, well, that doesn't mean it's Christian, and it's like it doesn't have that's not my point. It
Right.
doesn't
We're not drawing that line yet, and
yes, exactly.
if there is an opportunity for me to see that line drawn, I will try to
Absolutely.
fill
Yep.
that in. Go
Yep.
ahead.
So how would you like me to continue? Do you want to follow something where you're questioning me, or do you want me to continue and like
I will happily prompt this one. Um, so tell me of those knobs. What are the things that cannot move? By how much can they not move? And why?
um yes. So this is knobs and things like that. I have to take a moment to process. I would say
Take your time.
my my idea behind it is just that like I like to look at this one I guess ideological hypothetical principle. I don't know what
Okay.
the correct way. It's like a
Just describe it.
philosophical
Don't name it.
yeah.
Just tell us
If you
something.
take all the parts of an iPhone,
Yeah.
a relatively complicated thing, and you put it in a box, and this
Yeah.
box is timeless, does
Okay.
how long
This
does it
is
take
a
for an
shaken
atom?
up junkyard analogy.
Yeah, yeah. There's something that I don't know the name. I'm uneducated on this, but there is something that has been proposed. I think Apple is also
Specified complexity.
yeah. It's like Apple is also used. Like it's a deep philosophical question, which is like if you put an apple in a box and allow it to decompose naturally, but
Oh,
completely
yeah.
seal the box,
Yeah.
like and then let it exist for the rest of time, does the
Mhm.
matter in the apple eventually cycle back to becoming an apple?
No.
You don't think so?
Heat death. No.
So that's
Be
that.
because the way an apple is in an apple's in an unstable state. An apple is in an energetic, ready to be food state. To
Mhm.
get things to back up into an unstable food state, which naturally will decay on its own, requires the input of not what was contained in the apple, but in the tree that you've removed.
Well, right, but all the atoms in that apple, all the matter that are in that box is
I've heard this
in
one.
yeah, is
It
that
it fails to take into account heat death.
yeah, and that I agree. I don't think the apple can become the apple again.
Right.
That is this is something where I say some people think it can be. I think is
I've heard the argument, and I've seen it
yeah,
written out in quantum theory, and, I think it's an oversimplification.
I do too. And
Mhm,
but I think that that oversimplification can also be broadened. Like, and if you agree to it being oversimplified, you can broaden that
mhm,
out to say, okay, now look at our universe and,
mhm.
imagine it from its first like preliminal state of just matter. That's all it is matter. What is the chance that that matter over like cuz I mean, if you look at our universe as a big box, right?
It's mass energy in a very small ball, right?
Yeah. Well, I just mean like take everything like not even in the preliminal state, but even now if you look at it as like one box, right?
Okay, so we have our visible or observable universe that we're
Is
talking
that
about.
box, right?
Right. Mhm.
Because I
No
mean,
problem.
when you like
I'm
price
not worried that the edges are moving. Doesn't
yeah,
matter.
right. Don't worry
Keep
about
going.
that. Don't worry about that. It's just a box.
Mhm.
Maybe we're a circle and like all we can see is what started from the beginning and the actual parameters are whatever. It's a
Yeah.
box. And
I
so
even have opinions as to what those numbers are, but go ahead.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So you can look at it as we started in a state. I mean, a lot of people, at least the Big Bang Theory, would posit
Yes.
that we started in a state of just matter, compressed, dense matter. And now all of a sudden, over
Energy.
this
It
infinite
wouldn't have
time
been
period,
matter yet, but yes, mass energy.
over that infinite time period, we exist all of a sudden. And
Infinite. When did you I trip on infinite.
well, the idea of the box is that over it that you have unlimited time for the apple to decompose and become an apple again. That it will cycle through its potential
Okay, so
phases.
within our universe, it could be cyclic. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I would say we have a perception over the fact that it's not infinite yet, if that makes sense. But it's just
Sure,
that
it's not
if
infinite yet.
you
We
have
we don't
infinite,
we don't necessarily see an end state that's gonna end time. We don't see
yeah,
when time started. Right.
it would just say that
I
like
if
it's
time started.
mhm. Yeah,
Mhm.
so it would just be to say that if we can know that we exist now,
Yep.
then certainly that, an infinite more amount of time wouldn't make it any less likely. I'm trying
I
to
agree.
sorry, this I
In an infinite amount of time, with an infinite amount of possibility, all possible things will infinitely occur an infinite number of times.
yeah,
We're
if we
back
did
to
it in
square
a
root.
finite time, if we existed through random chance in a finite
Right.
time,
Uh-huh.
infinite time should not be any different, be just having more time for the processes to
Right.
take
So
place.
all possible situations will occur an infinite number of times, infinitely separate and never able to interact with each other, apparently.
Yeah,
Except by
and
something that is able to transcend, which is I think you're postulating that there probably is something like that, but maybe that's not part of your argument.
not
No,
not not
it is
quite
because
yet. I'm just trying
so
to
it transcends the boundary the timelessness
yeah,
on the
I'm more so trying to correlate it to the Apple problem,
okay.
which is if someone can say the apple can't become the apple again with infinite amount of time, how is that any different than our universe with limited time being able to not just come up with an apple, but people
Because
who
the
are able to
universe
eat the
contains a
apple?
tree.
Sorry?
Because the universe contains the tree. And the universe hello, Saber. The universe contains the sun and
But it all
the
just
things
started as
that are not
unified matter, right? In our box. Like,
what was the mass energy in a hot dense state? Yes, boom.
yeah. So it's
With a
just
net
matter.
energy of 0.
There's no tree, there's no apple. And in like obviously it took a long time, but then that matter turned into the tree, to turn into
Yes,
the earth, to turn to the
yes,
apple, to turn to
yeah.
the sun. So
Mhm,
it's like if you have a box with, an apple,
mhm.
right? What's stopping the apple over billions, infinite amount like time
Feedback.
constraints don't exist. Why doesn't that apple then go through a similar process of cycling through different like why can't that matter
That's
eventually turn into
absolutely
its
correct.
own
Yes, those are
small
cyclic.
earth?
Those are
Now,
cyclic
obviously,
energies.
I
Yes.
wanna also remove, like, the quantities in which the atomic that there are atoms, in there because someone could say, "Oh, well, the atom has a very fractional amount of atoms than our universe has, and so there may be more opportunities through that, mindset." So then I would just say, take an apple with all the matter in the universe,
Okay,
you
so
know
good. You've just quoted Carl Sagan, or I will, and say that if you want to make an apple pie from scratch, first you must create a universe. I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, an apple in a box, as shown, is not enough of a complete system to regenerate itself. But the universe in a cyclic cosmology would be.
Well, that's why I wanna remove it and just say you have an apple, and this you can call me out if you think this doesn't work, but if you had an apple, theoretically,
Mhm.
that had the same matter our universe does, but it's all
Yes.
just an apple, just a huge apple.
It's all made of apple. Okay.
Yep, it's
In
all
our
made of
current
apple,
universe,
but
it will be a black hole.
in quantity of atoms, they are mirrored that of what we can experience in our universe, so there's
10
no
to the 80 subatomic particles on the
right.
order.
Yep,
Mhm.
well, do you think okay, well then
That's an estimate of the subatomic particles in our,
yeah,
and obviously
so
it's a very fluffy estimate, okay? I could be wrong by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude.
So can elemental components stem from other elemental components
Yes.
as means if you have a matter of all carbon in a billion years, can that carbon also become plutonium through
Yeah.
atomic reordering?
Yes.
Okay. So
That's
then
that would be the fusion of stars up to atoms and then supernova causing all of the stuff that's
right.
higher than iron.
So you have a big apple and it's all the same
Okay.
matter, like types of matter that we would assert to an apple, just a lot of it. And you leave it
Okay.
in this
So it's a
universal
lot of
stream.
oxygen and hydrogen and carbon, and
Right.
it's chum. It's
Yes.
carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen. Not very much nitrogen. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
And you leave it in a box, universally sized, size, time, they are
Mhm.
not factors. Does that apple become its own universe and then become an apple
Yeah.
again? Okay, so
Well,
you say
yes,
yes.
to the degree that it doesn't fall into a black hole. The nature of what you're providing as starting materials are very much heavier than what our universe started with, which was almost entirely hydrogen and some helium and a little bit of lithium, and ignore the uh, so very, very light, fluffy stuff.
Uh,
And that's going to come together at a different level than things that would be very much heavier and would have to get a lot more dense before they started to fuse. So these things are going to come in much larger clumps and probably be over the 2.6 Chandrasekhar limit, where things will just spontaneously plop into a black hole, going
uh,
past our horizon and essentially going out of our universe, except still interacting at a gravitational level.
yeah, black holes are weird.
Yeah,
I do
black
not wanna
and
pretend to understand any of the physics with a
black
black
holes are
hole.
really important to your fine-tuning argument
How would
because
you say it? Please educate me.
yeah, well, black holes, at least with the constants as I understand them, happen at this particular size, and there's nothing to stop them. Once the density and the thing gets to this, and never and it's a one-way street. So it's removing mass from our universe and just storing it in a place, and taking it past a horizon where we can't ever interact with it again. Okay, so it is possible to evaporate them, but it's ridiculous time.
Mhm,
Um, the point of black holes is one of your fine tuning constants keeps us from all falling into black hole really, really fast. Right now, a significant fraction of the mass of our universe is in black holes.
mhm.
If you're fine tuning constants, well, some of your knobs, if just a little bit further this way, only a little bit, would cause the vast majority of our mass to be in black holes and no longer interacting and being able to be a universe and make apples.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right.
so
So
yeah,
that's why black holes, exactly what about black holes doesn't matter what the math is. Just know that it's one of those things that if you change some of those constants just a little bit, like the gravity constant, the black holes just expand exponentially.
so I appreciate that because that substantiates what I'm trying to say, without me ever having had the knowledge. I don't wanna pretend like I
It's
had thought ahead of
probably
time.
right. 1.4 is, I'm probably misquoting the Chandrasekhar limit of 1.4 to make a supernova, and it's a different thing that I'm calling the 2.6 number. That is, it spontaneously falls into a black hole below a certain mass.
So, I don't wanna pretend like I was coming in here to talk about black holes, um,
Totally, totally, totally.
but
This is
you no, 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 I mean,
yeah.
like, I don't wanna, like, give
Mhm,
myself credit where it's not due because
mhm,
I recognize how what you're saying makes sense and it aligns with what I'm saying. I just wanna make sure I'm being transparent because if
yeah,
somebody's like, "Oh," and then brings up a counter argument to the point you said, I don't wanna be like,
mm,
I honestly had no idea about this ahead of time." It makes sense though because
yeah, yeah.
it is to be true that there is a mathematical calculatable factor that we can assert to being a tiny adjustment to a knob,
Mhm,
which would dramatically change the, availability of, you know,
mhm,
matter outside of like, availability of matter in our universe to then eventually create humanity and what we can observe,
mhm.
then that makes sense as a part to saying, yes, there has to be divine intervention to keep that knob from turning a specific way to make it and I just don't understand the math behind it because I as a
Yeah,
physics like, I enjoy
it's not important that you would understand the math. Just
yeah. I
knowing that the math is there and pointing at that one, and then this expert says that this fine tuning knob and so on. That's the
which
level
is
that you're approaching it.
It's funny because I actually wanted to major in physics. I
Mhm,
should have. Like, the more I talk, I'm like, oh, I love this. I love this stuff so much. It didn't end up working out. I started at finance, and it was too hard for me to incorporate a physics major. But
mhm,
I do love physics a lot, and like
mhm.
the principles around it. I just don't have, unfortunately, the education to fully understand the math or know ahead of time through
Yeah.
studying. But anyways, yeah. So I think we're starting to paint a picture. We got a little bit, I think, off track, especially if anybody joined in the middle of that. So
Yeah,
to
sorry.
reiterate,
Got too much detailed on black holes.
yeah, the black holes as a part of this fine tuning argument as something that is detrimental to the let me make sure I'm understanding you correctly. You're saying that black
Mhm.
holes are detrimental to the potential development of any universal system as
Yeah.
something that is unrecoverable from as a state. Like, if
Well, it might be recoverable in a cyclic cosmology, the kind of
okay,
thing where at the end it doesn't just die in a heat death of ridiculous expansion, but it comes back together, recoalesces, and reprocesses, recycles.
right,
And
okay.
and
So that and that's just
I
something we
don't know
can't
what
know.
that function would be, but um, I've heard credible cosmologies that posit that as a
Is there a view that black holes are not necessarily extra universal to or like to what we observe, but just so dense that we can't like because I don't know what the most accepted view of black holes are as it relates to what we can see in our universe. Because it sounded like what you were saying was a black hole removes matter from our universe. And
well, it removes it to beyond a horizon where we can only interact it with it in gravitationally. It removes it from all chemical or electromagnetic or other kind of interaction. It only interacts gravitationally anymore. Uh, there might be magnetic field something, but I'm not sure that the magnetic field is piercing the horizon. Uh,
so does
the
that
point is,
interaction like then cause us to propose that it is no longer in our universe, or is it simply that its density?
I'm calling our universe the places where we can have horizon up to, the visible universe, the
Okay, okay.
one that we can have any access to. Now, there's horizons on in every direction. If you look far enough, there's the cosmic microwave background. That's one of
Mhm.
the horizons we can't see past, and we don't have any way to see past. Anything that we do about looking at like the texture of it is just trying to
Okay.
understand what might have come before, but we can't ever get any information from before.
So you could say that the the a black hole, since it is unobservable to us, is not in our universe, but also still not believe that there is a multiverse outside of our own. Like,
Yeah, I can't tell whether multiverse things are. They're beyond my horizon.
right, that's why like it's more so to just
It's interesting
like
conjecture,
just
but if until I can have a test that can make a positive that can make a future testable prediction, it's just in the realm of could be.
it's not what we can see. That's
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
It's just
I'm totally agnostic
those
on it.
2 things aren't, you don't have to believe both of them. It's like, okay, you can be outside of our universe, but it can still
Yeah, no
be
problem.
yeah, yeah, okay.
And
Um,
and I can say yes or no to multiverse, and it doesn't really affect much of anything because so far multiverse doesn't make any predictions different than not multiverse.
yeah. So to before I wanna delve into the nitty-gritty of what could or couldn't be
Mhm,
true about my idea, I wanna finish, I think it because it's not this is not as expansive as I think my original meaning was when I talked about God as logic,
mhm.
um, as a
Yeah,
means of
this is much more
understanding
concrete.
logical principles. But, like, it's more so to say, okay, even I mean, I wanna make sure I want because there are 2 directions you can take this. You can expand
Mhm,
it way out and say one thing, and then you can go fine tune like, you can go fine and say, "Okay, this is much more." So we'll go small before I go big, and you'll understand what I'm saying. I don't
mhm,
when you look at your everyday life and, like, chances of things happen in correlation to themselves, you
mhm,
can observe something that seems improbable
mhm.
and then almost define meaning from those improbabilities. Like, if you look at all these things that happen improbably to each other, then it's like you may find that there's a correlation behind these improbable events that then starts to call almost like a personality to the universe. And it's like,
Mhm.
I think that there is something that, is already sort of relatable that we can see happen in like a place that is secularly spiritual. And like, that's how I like to call it, because a lot of people say, oh, the universe is telling me I should marry this person. Like, it's like a surrender to an understanding that you can't have that, but based on the fact that you're seeing correlation in events. And I think,
Okay, so you're seeing correlation in events, and you are reading into those that there is an intention in the universe attempting to give you a message through those correlations.
yes, I'm saying that people already somewhat see this in what I consider secular spirituality from any individual who is atheist. Like, not all atheists do this, and I would never want to say that anyone who identifies as atheist
Mhm.
in this chat or listening to this
Oh,
would
yeah,
say,
yeah.
"Oh, I well, I
Atheists
don't
are
do that, so you're wrong to
good
say that."
children. Mhm.
But then, like, there are a lot of people who don't consider themselves religious at all, but then will say, "Oh, the universe must want me to do this." Like, or they'll already recognize it. I'm using that as an example to
I
show
understand. What
people are
when they
finding
say
these
this
correlations.
when they say
It's
this,
already something observed.
what okay, so people make this attribution, and they say that the universe is attempting to communicate to me. Okay.
Yes.
And I think you're saying that this is reason that we should consider that the universe does have this capability to communicate with us because we commonly make this attribution. Yes?
Yeah, and well, not just that we make this attribution, but that so the acknowledge or like the observation that people make the attribution is
Mhm.
enough to say, well, let's study this. Is
Yeah.
there really correlation in probabilities, say like in probabilities that things are happening in a way that doesn't show randomness as we would understand random to look?
Okay, good. Yes. Can we detect the non-randomness of real things in
Exactly.
order to see if messages are being sent from the universe to people through non-randomness of events?
Yes. And then this
Good.
then yeah,
Templeton. Yes.
yes, and then that goes right into
Templeton
a
Foundation has done this.
personal spiritual relationship that some religious people then have because they would believe these messages are God talking to them. And this is why some people can have a extremely strong faith in what they believe in, the Christianity that they've indoctrined themselves with, without having the understanding to explain it to a scientific minded atheist who's going to
Mhm.
say, well, how do you explain creation it like young earth versus old earth and like carbon dating and all these things? Like, they don't know any of that. They just know what they've experienced from saying, you know what, like, I watched it. I saw this video come up on my For
Mhm.
You page, and then my dad talked to me about the same thing, and then from that, it led me to like completely change my perspective with my best friend
Mhm.
who had a near death experience or whatever. Like, it's just finding, anything that can relate to itself. And then
Mhm.
from that, someone derives a spiritual meaning. And then from that, they say, I've known God, I have a personal relationship with him. And that's what they
Mhm.
determine as that personal relationship is this correlation of events. And that would be what I consider the small way of looking at fine tuning, because it's like, okay, well, now how can we establish probability to say this is random for any
Mhm.
individual or any number of individuals observing
Mhm.
these types of things?
Well, that's social sciences, and I've got a friend who's an expert in it, a college professor on it, and it's taught me most of what I know about it. So, yeah,
It'd be
that
interesting.
that is something we have access to
That's
with
cool.
correlation.
Yeah, I would like to look at that for sure.
Check out
Because
the Templeton Foundation. Are you familiar with them?
sorry, what did you say?
Templeton Foundation.
Templeton Foundation. I will
Mhm.
make a note about that. Are you
Yeah,
encouraging me to look at it? Is
yeah,
that
I'm
what you're?
encouraging you to look at it. Not later.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm just typing it down a
yeah,
while.
yeah,
Templeton
Templeton
Foundation.
Foundation. They do studies trying to determine very much the kind of thing you're doing. Sometimes it's interventional prayer studies. One that I'm thinking of particularly is where they had 3 groups of heart patients, and they were in the same set of overlapping facilities, whatever it was, randomly selected. And one group got no intervention at all. One group got prayed for in a large set of prayer circles and were told that they were being prayed for. They were being told that they were part of the group. And then there was a third group that was prayed for in the prayer circles that was not told that they were part of a group. So you have those three. Does that make
Interesting.
it clear?
Yeah, that is an
What would
interest.
you
I would
predict?
definitely like to see the conclusions of that study. I mean,
Excellent. Please look it up.
yeah, I will.
I would love to hear your read on their results.
Yeah, and that's also, I mean, a whole separate thing. I
Mhm.
struggle to understand prayer. As I said in the very beginning of this, I don't have my beliefs all like
Yeah.
figured out yet. And currently, it's hard for me to see the influence prayer has over our relational
Yeah.
experiences in person. But I also want to, before I forget, go
Yeah.
into what I think is the expanded view of chance,
Oh,
which
good.
if our like expanded would say, okay, well, we're in a universe that is it may be secular, it may be terminal, like we don't know exactly from that stance, but then it's like, okay, well, now what are the chances that if it, let's say, for instance, it is secular, what are the chances that that secular universe could exist to allow us to exist? And how many like how many lucky instances would have had to have happened for this to be simultaneously random and true for us to like exist. Like if
One.
it what? What is that?
It's one. The probability is one that in an infinite series of trying different possible
Yeah.
outcomes, you will make an infinite number of those
I've heard
infinitely
that.
separately. Um,
But you have to be secular then,
yeah,
correct?
if you're cyclic, if you're cyclic and infinite, you will try all possible combinations. And so,
Is what are
in
the
some
chances?
impossibly removed time or other multiverse, you and I are having this same conversation.
Yeah, that's I thinking about that. So I it's so mind-boggling.
It is, and every
I
possible
think that it
deviation
is
from
logically
it.
consistent.
In one of these, we're arguing fiercely.
I think it is logically consistent, and it's sort of scary to imagine that.
Sure.
Um, I think it is for a lot of people because then it's like, okay, how do you even comprehend that level of size? Because not only is there in a universe where we're just arguing, but
Hmm.
that's in and alongside every possible version of not only my life, but every way in which the atoms in my composition
Mhm.
have formulated every possible human,
Oh,
right? Because it's saying that anything possible has occurred and will
yeah,
occur in the same sense.
in an infinite multiverse, yes. Mhm.
Right, and that I actually
And
saw a
this is
TikTok
one of the
that said
multiverses that's, like,
that
linear,
number
right?
is skews constant or something.
No.
It's 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 34.
What is that?
The forget what it was something I thought it was like skews number or
That is
something.
actually a bigger number than I can imagine.
Yeah,
I have no
so
trouble at all with 10 to the 80, but
10
10 to the
10
10
to
to
the
the
power of 10
34?
to the power of 10 to the power of 34 is
It
apparent like,
I
listen,
don't have a
TikTok
way
is
to wrap my head around that.
so
What
I
is
can
that
do a
for?
quick Google search here, but
Sure.
it's apparently a proposition to what the possible combinations of like of of atoms in our universe, of all the
Okay,
matter and all the
sure.
possible combinations that the matter can form.
If I take 2, of a deck of cards, 52 cards,
Yeah, 52,
red jack
I
and
forget what
blue
it's
back,
called.
a
I
52
know,
card deck, okay?
yeah,
Throwing out the jokers.
factorial that.
I have 104 cards, and I shuffle them together, and I'm a good shuffler, so I'm good and random, and I shuffled them at least 7 times. The order of 104 cards is now unique
Yeah, I've
in
heard this.
10 to the 166th. That is more than the square of the number of subatomic particles in our visible universe.
Yes,
So
yeah.
being able to come up with wildly large numbers of probabilities is like, yeah, it's trivially easy on two decks of cards. Uh, uh, as soon as we introduce the infinite, we remove the whole question of probability. Now,
Yeah.
now possibility is the only thing we have left.
Yeah, I was only using this as a means of
Sure.
defining the sheer incomprehensibility of, if that's even a
Mhm.
word, the incomprehensibility of what it would mean if every possible combination were to exist. And there was just a video I saw that was talking about large numbers, and they claimed that there was a determined
Yeah,
proposed like, really, it's just ideological mathematical number to assert all the possible matter combinations, and they said 10 to the
sure.
power of 10 to the power of 10 to the power of 34, which is just the only way that it can ever even be written, because if you were to try and list out the numbers or something, like, we wouldn't even have, like, enough matter to, like,
Well, yeah,
write
you couldn't encode the number in the
anyway.
atoms in our universe. So
Yeah,
the the it becomes this wildly theoretical number.
right,
Um,
and it's just a matter of explaining, yeah, that's,
yeah,
like,
yeah.
we can't understand what that number looks like, and it is certainly terrifying to consider, um, that if infinite really looks that way, then that is what we, like, are
Do you have
part
a
of.
reason to believe any infinites exist? I'll come back to Sapir's question.
Um, you mean from a non-religious standpoint, or from a, like, from how I believe, or from, like, if scientific principles can remain consistent while allowing for
I'm asking
infinity?
you what you think, and you might have good reasons that transcend religion, and some of them might be based in religion. I'd like to hear all.
So I definitely think that scientifically, infinity, scientific, like, mathematically, infinity exists, because I think, if you look at an irrational number, and we can, I mean, because of our universe having patterns, we can extend that pattern to believe that through practice of determining the numbers of pi, we can continue to go and it should never stop. We have
Yeah.
no way of truly testing that, but
Yes,
that
we do.
is,
Yes, we've
like,
proven it. We've
well, I
proven
mean, like, how do we know that eventually it just doesn't stop?
because okay, the proofs are deep, and
Don't, yeah, I
I
probably
don't
wouldn't
know.
understand.
But the proofs that irrational numbers are indeed actually infinite are well established in math. I have no
Okay.
trouble at all with that. In math, they exist in that imagination, in that language. They are clearly defined.
And I have
Is there
reason to
any?
believe that that language is so applicable to our universe that
Okay.
we
That's the reason.
our
That
universe
that
of
math
yes,
is so unreasonably applicable that we should extend the things that math says
to
exist
our universe.
to that they probably have physical reality.
Yeah.
Okay.
And because infinity, if it weren't to exist, can exist in math. So if it can exist in math and we can prove that, then time could perhaps be infinite. And with infinite time, as you said, the possibility for our existence is one.
Okay.
And that mathematical, like, scientifically, infinity exists. Religiously, I think
Okay.
it also exists as a means of defining God to the parameters that, like, it basically says
Because your
God
religion
is
defines God
is
as
an
eternal,
infinitely
that's
powerful
an
being.
example of infinity.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, good enough. Uh,
Um,
sorry, I keep jumping into this. I don't wanna actually cut you off,
yeah,
or
no, go ahead.
okay, good, thank you, sorry. Snopper asks, "Could God change the constants and still sustain or maintain the universe exactly as it is?"
So which constants? All constants?
Um, well, I think the standard of, fine-tuning arguments that I've heard, and probably what Sapir is referring to, is that the physical constants need to be exactly as they are, in
Okay.
order for our universe to permit us to have come to be. Is that and
Yeah,
I
no,
haven't
yeah.
I've only heard you kind of dance around that. So let me not assume that argument.
I have to think. So, okay. Let me answer it this way.
Sure.
If you were to look at one yes or no observable answer. So, who's cousin?
Jeez.
If you were to look at one like observable polarized outcome, as in the
Mhm.
wall is black or the wall is blue, and that's the observer. So just a wall, like we'll say that wall right there. It's
Yes.
either white or black,
Okay.
okay, and the or no, I should say blue or red. Sorry, and it's white
Okay.
right now, and
Okay.
I'm painting it blue tomorrow.
Okay.
But there are so many things that could happen for me to end up changing my mind and painting it red. But
Yes.
this
I have a
observable
whole box
outcome,
of dice for that.
yeah, this observable outcome is polarized between two things. So it's either
Okay.
blue.
It'll
Yes,
either be blue or red, but there's a bunch of random factors
yes, and
that
that
will influence it.
correlate to whichever one it is, but it can only be
Mhm.
one or two. And this is there are
It
other
will
better ones
result
that
in
are
one or
actually
two.
truly polar, but for now, we'll say red or blue.
You've set the
And
system up that way. I accept it.
yeah, okay. Um, God, through practice of correlated events, can make either of those options
Yes.
happen through different means. And
Yes.
so the constants that would have to be associated in reaching that outcome can be different. But for the total encompassing like for everything to happen the way that he wants it to happen, there can only be one way. So if God, so we're looking at a difference between a single conclusion or a single
Oh,
outcome versus every outcome. Because, like,
okay.
say, in order for me
Are
to
you
get,
a hard determinist? Do you know what I mean?
yes, I'm a hard determinist, but
Okay.
not a
So,
Calvinist.
well,
Okay, I don't want to. I
I'm not saying
don't let
religiously.
me. Don't,
I have a lot of atheist friends who are hard determinists.
yeah, so I don't want to answer that question yet. I don't want to
That's
answer that
fine.
yet.
That's fine. This is just to tell the audience
Yeah, yeah.
where
I
where
don't think
go ahead.
I'm a hard first off, I haven't actually answered that question before in my life. So my assumption is hard determinist means just that you believe
Maybe
every
you
event will
lean that
happen
way.
exactly the way.
That's fine.
So, but what I'm using in my thing is
Mhm.
in my metaphor here is in or analogy, one or the other, maybe analogy. And to get the wall blue, you may have to something may need to have happened where they ran out of red paint at the store that I'm going to buy the paint.
Mhm.
And that could happen a multitude of ways, but they ran out of red paint and I painted the wall blue. And other
This all
things
comes
can
down
happen
to
too.
Schrodinger's wall. We can really come down to the final answer that is the Schrodinger's cat analogy of a radioactive thing, because God's in control of that.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
think I what are you
a
saying
com
exactly? I've heard of
Schrodinger's
Schrodinger's cat.
cat in the box is killed because a radioactivity detector detects an emission of a radiation that is like 50% likely, something like that, and it will pop a little capsule that kills the cat or not. And until you open the box, the cat is either alive or dead. This is the metaphor of Schrodinger's cat. What you're describing with your wall is a condition that is A or B, is fixed into that condition and influenced by randoms. And in this case, you can come down to one single random that God controls and solve your whole complex metaphor.
I think I may have been taking it a different direction. It was
Maybe.
only I was only gonna say that to get to blue or red, there can be different paths.
Yes.
But to get to the path that got you to blue or red, that got to
Mhm.
the paint running out, had its own path, that
Yeah.
has its own path, and you can look at it all as one thing to say that everything had to have happened in one way. There is only
Mhm.
one way
Okay.
that things could have happened. Like,
So
well, yeah,
in this case, we have a chunk of radioactive material, and any one of the atoms could have decayed and been detected or not. But in your sake, a particular one of the atoms did. And that particular atom decaying at that particular time triggering that particular detector is exactly God's plan.
I wish I was more knowledgeable to Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah,
So it's
I'm not.
50/50.
Yeah, go ahead.
So you're saying that it's perfectly balanced and it just takes one
So you
over
have,
it
yeah,
ha
you
to
have a
get
sample
just
and you
above
have a
50.
detector, and you know how often the detector goes off, right?
Yeah.
Statistically, you measure that for a year, right?
Yeah.
And you put the cat in a box for long enough that it's got a 50-50 chance of surviving. This just sets up your binary condition for you.
You're right, right.
And then the randomness of radioactivity then is whether that particular dice roll causes the cat's death.
Okay.
Okay.
So, and then for the randomness to equate to the polar or to the outcome of death would be just a single atomic particle moving in a single direction. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, a single atomic particle emits something that is detected by the detector, which then triggers the poison.
Okay. And why is that 50/50? Is that just theoretical?
Because we measured the radioactivity of that stuff for a really long time, so we got a really good handle on how long it takes for an average of one particle over this much time. And then we measured how much time the cat has to spin in the box to have a 50% chance of death.
Okay.
And that's just so that we could set the dice at 50-50. You could set it at whatever
Right.
you like.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, so yeah, I think that's basically what I'm saying. Uh it would just be like at like a small scale for that atom to emit that radiation that would push things over the edge. There may have to also be like actually no. Yeah, this is exactly what I'm saying because you're getting to the point that is so small that it almost seems that there is no procedural process to start that. Like the butterfly effect almost. Cuz I think I would like
Sabine Hossenfelter, who is a hard determinist and one of my favorite science teachers, would say that the overall waveform of the universe and everything about quantum theory is actually deterministic on the math. And because you see that math is very much has almost a causal relationship or a very, very tight relationship with physics, you're going to assume that if the math says so, that the physics says so. Okay. And that puts you in the hard determinist camp with Sabine, my favorite science teacher. So you're way not wrong. Um, and
yeah.
you would say that if you rolled back time and rolled it back through again, that in fact that same atom would in fact kill the cat or not the same way.
Yeah.
And you could call it hidden variables. There's lots of ways to say it, but the quantum theory is the way it's done is deterministic. And if you don't agree with Sabine, like I don't in this case, you would say that the determinism is an overreach, and that Heisenberg tells us that what we know is that it isn't, but that there's a randomness that is actually there. But I'm not here to argue the position. You're in good steady with my favorite science teacher.
Okay, cool. Because I have not studied any of that, which is why I'm trying very hard to follow
Yeah,
along. And for clarification's sake,
it's very much an open question
is
in
he
science.
saying that because if is he saying that given a perfect understanding of mathematical principles, we can figure out the procedure that went in place for everything to have happened so that randomness doesn't exist and everything is determined? Like,
No, because we can't observe the hidden
no,
variables beneath
well,
Heisenberg.
no, it's
It's
saying
on
that
the
if
other side. The information that we would need, assuming that we had the processing power to address it, which we don't,
right.
but assuming the perfect computer, the information that we need is still hidden behind a horizon we can't see. The Heisenberg horizon down at the tiny.
Okay. And so that Heisenberg, how does that relate to the idea of a deterministic like belief structure?
Because as far as we can observe, Heisenberg is random.
Okay.
And therefore, at the quantum level, our universe is very random and is only statistically classical once you get enough of the things to create the bell curves, and that actual conservation of mass energy is in fact a classical statistical distribution, not a quantum actual distribution. And this is an open question in science.
Okay.
This is an open controversy.
Yeah, I can see my knowledge of quantum physics starting to be an issue here because
Sure, and it's not part of
I
it's not
know
part of the
quantum.
claim you're making, and that's fine.
Yeah, I have a familiarity with quantum,
Mhm.
with how there is like unknown like outcomes that occur in the quantum realm that we don't know if are truly random or determined, I think, but it's so outside my realm of expertise. I'm not an expert in anything, but it's so outside my realm of knowledge that I really can't even speak to it in any way without, getting it wrong. But
Yeah.
backtracking a little bit, as I love going down these rabbit holes. I like physics a lot and I
Mhm.
love learning new things and trying to understand what you're saying.
Mhm.
So through measure of outcome, I want to take it a little bit away from the atomic level and just say
Okay.
that for a blue or red wall to exist, that outcome can have multiple different paths, but the paths themselves, whichever one becomes that way
Mhm.
or whatever happens, is the only way it could have happened. So to answer his question concerning constants, every constant, every piece in place has to happen for God's way to prevail. Like he
Okay.
has to determine every single thing. He can't just like e- uh what would be a good like he can't just, oh, it seemed like, you know Hitler exists and that's bad and all things have to work to
Mhm.
good, so I have to work extra hard to make the Hitler thing a good thing.
Okay.
Like, because that's like the worst thing that is agreeable that to have ever happened in our history. And so for Romans 8:28 to hold true, everything in the I'm gonna poorly quote it, like all things work together for good. I think that's actually correctly quoted. All things work together for good. So that would mean that
For those
Hitler
who love God.
somehow worked together to be good. What?
For
Sorry.
those for
Oh,
those who love God.
yeah, for those who love
That
God.
that's an important if,
And
because
we
that means that
yeah,
things will not necessarily work out for the good for me.
right. Right. So for that statement to be true, for those who love God, as I do think that many people who love God were negatively affected by Hitler, that doesn't mean that the Hitler situation was something God had to work overtime for to make sure the outcome remained true to that original statement. Like, I think that all
I
things.
didn't understand what you just said. That sounded like you said that people that loved God, it didn't work out for them, but God didn't
No,
have
no,
to
no.
work
So
overtime to
it,
do something with Hitler.
like, that, yeah, I see where you're, it was. Negative is a relative term that comes to our observation, like, because
Mhm.
you would say, okay, for things to work out for good, like we have to remove ourselves from an earthly understanding of what good can mean because like
Okay.
an individual, like, but like
You
it's,
need to look at good at larger than human life, than the
yeah,
human lifespan.
yeah. So
Okay, fine. No
for good
problem
to
then.
happen for those people,
You got it worked out then.
God has to have some type of influence over things that happen. And
And I think them getting to heaven, and I think your position is that if they didn't get to heaven, they didn't suffer further except briefly. Uh,
sure,
uh,
but the importance of
so
my
that worked
position
out
is,
for good for them.
yeah.
That's
So,
just done.
but my only point in bringing this up is that
Mhm.
the God didn't have to work overtime because of all the bad that Hitler was trying to do. So, like,
Well,
God's
if God's determining it down to this is the magic divine pull shot of setting
right,
it all in motion and having the end result of the universe come down to the finest particle of fitting within God's plan.
right, and so
So,
all of it,
and whether that was the pull shot that did it, or whether God is constantly massaging all the randoms along the way, kind of doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah, I agree.
So fine-tuning is not indicated differently than God's continuous intervention in maintaining God's plan. Because God could
Well,
have started the
if
pull
he's
shot completely
massaging the
wrong and then just adjusted it.
so if he's massaging the randoms versus, as you said, versus hard determining them, how are those how are those different in any way?
They're different. One, that you don't have fine-tuning anymore because he could have got the pull shot wrong to begin with and then fixed it as it went.
That's what I don't think that ever happened. He doesn't get the pull shot wrong. He has to always get it correct.
Why is that important?
Because God is he is all powerful.
Yeah.
So for everything to take place, all of his all actions that run all actions run through him and are for what he wants. So like
If he can massage the ongoing in a miraculous way, then he can allow for free will. If he did the perfect pull shot, he has to have perfect knowledge of everything, and really, you don't have free will except for being part of that pull shot. God is powerful. God can
yeah,
intervene with the randoms, right? He would have that option.
this is where I struggle so much because it's like I you're right because the free will has to exist somewhere in there, and if everything is hard determined, then we lose that
Yeah.
idea of free will. So like if he's allowing for things to happen, okay.
I want to take you to the Exodus plagues and say, if indeed if indeed God and Aaron and Moses were negotiating in good faith, then God was in fact modifying the randoms as he went to get the result, even to the point of at one point saying, and I hardened Pharaoh's heart because I wanted it to come out this other way that it wouldn't have. So he's admitting free will is the standard, and in that particular case, overrode it for his own reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of changing my perspective now on account of what you're saying.
Okay.
I agree. Like you're saying this as an argument to the idea that fine tuning may not be a strong stance.
I'm just balancing fine tuning the like hard versus soft determinism difference is whether randomness is going on, and in this case, if God is powerful enough to control the randoms, then he doesn't need the fine tuning initially, and by doing the proper fine tuning that sets everybody up for proper free will, and then following their free will, reforming the universe back to his plan, that also indicates the God just as firmly. And I'm not saying you should choose one of these over the other.
No, yeah.
I'm saying
Okay.
I think you have good scriptural basis for either position.
I do too. I like the massaging the randoms. I think that to me, at least scripturally, I think makes a little bit more sense because it I think it is more characteristic to allowance of evil in certain situations without establishing because another big thing that I've believed that there is not the same indictment to inaction as there is action. So if God
Mhm.
allows something to happen, that does mean that is not the same as God causing something to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, you've solved your problem of evil. Everything does definitely work out for good for those that love God and go to heaven, and for those that don't, they don't suffer further. That
Yeah.
solves that problem. I'm done. I'm good.
So this is I feel like breaking down I guess what my original plan was to talk about today and I'm losing my place a little bit because
That's okay. This has been a fantastic live stream. I really appreciate it, and if you have further thoughts after you've thought about it, let's do more on this and other. Would do you have a summary that you'd like to leave us with?
that's what I was going to ask you. Like what do you
Summary.
think since
Okay.
this is my opportunity to explain certain things. Could you summarize what you gathered from what I
Yes.
said? And then
Yes.
I can then use that as a means of reflection to look at and say, oh, well, that's not quite what I meant to say, or at
Good.
least,
I will
yeah.
try to do that. So, Nathan has come to us today with a fine-tuning argument, a little novel in that mostly he was not working from mathematical improbabilities, but working from uh, that God had to make essentially a perfect pool shot at the beginning that was some number that had to be perfect within 10 to the 10 to the 35 or whatever, but it doesn't matter what the number was. An extremely, extremely precise shot that would actually result in an end state of the universe that was uh, accurate on the scale of which subatomic particles decayed when. And uh, that is well within his understanding of God's all powerfulness. We went down a path of describing infinities and multiversesness, where we could get rid of the fine tuning if only we invoked infinity. And I think Nathan thinks that infinities are valid in physical space because they are so strongly indicated as valid in mathematical space. And that's a pretty good reason to start with. That's a very good intuition start. Um, so let's see. And then we discussed whether controlling randoms was an alternative to making the perfect shot, and I think we talked about scriptural reasons why intervention later uh, might be the way he works, and that allows for much more free will. Did I get the summary?
Yes. The only unfortunate thing with how this went is
Mm-hmm.
that I think I lose a lot of my argument for fine tuning as a means of demonstrating personality, at least in the grand scheme of things. Because
Mm-hmm.
as you said,
Yeah.
acknowledging the existence of infinity, which I believe
Mm-hmm.
one must like pretty much has to do. I think infinity has a very strong structure behind it in scientific principles and mathematics. So for infinity to exist, and I think the biggest takeaway, at least from this standpoint, for infinity to exist and for all combinations of matter to then be possible through that means of understanding what infinity is,
Mm-hmm.
a fine tuning argument to the allowance of our existence loses its merit because it always happens. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and that is at least something that we can understand without the knowledge of God. And so that's where I think I did lose that principle, which is why I
Mm-hmm.
think our this is actually, I think, potentially a good structure into what I remember you talking about could be the next conversation, which is the personal relationship that people have with God. Because, and I just want to say that, like, as I'm glad I prefaced this in the beginning, I don't necessarily know what I completely believe, and
Mm-hmm.
through working it out, I've determined that the fine tuning at large scale is not a good way of determining. I don't think it's a good evidential basis for Christianity or
Oh,
for God because of the idea of infinity. So that's something I kind of learned today and
wow.
really wrestling with this. Yeah, I know.
Mm,
Yes.
mm, mm.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I
Thank you.
appreciate it. And so I wanted to, formulate that. But I don't want that to discredit the personal relationship that
Not
could
at all.
exist and that the
I
social
want to get
structure
that its
around
own show.
that. That's another whole nother thing to wrestle
Yep.
with on another time. But I think that does a little bit wrap up what we were saying because with a nice little bow
Mm-hmm.
on it, in saying yes, at large scale, both can exist. Both God and science can be valid explanations for the possibility and probability for what we experience today.
Mm, mm,
Um,
mm, mm.
I think both of those are very. They are not one can exist, like they can both exist. They're not mutually exclusive to each other. I think I'm still using that phrase correctly because
Right.
they both can exist, and obviously you can't believe both. You really choose one or the other, but like
Mhm. Thank you. Well
Thank
stated.
you.
Well stated. Sapir, yes, your questions were actually fantastic, and very much on topic, and very much guided my questions along the prod. So your questions were not at all misplaced in the context. They were fantastic. Thank you all. And if we both wave, the broadcast, the thing will cut off. Thank you.